So for the personal interpretation, I got suggested Longtail, and I was really glad that he had got suggested actually because he's one of my favourite characters, and I don't really vibe with like a lot of people's designs of him, not because they're bad or anything, but I don't like the ones that are super grey, but I don't like the ones that are super yellow, and I picture him in this very specific in-between that I don't see people drawing him as very often. And now I made a design for him about 3 years ago, but I really hate it. I somehow made it both bland and overcomplicated at the same time, and it's nothing like I actually picture him. And also, because I have a longtail map scripted, that I've had scripted for a while actually, I'm still really interested in hosting this, so I thought it'd be nice to get like a design concept down for him when I do eventually host this map. So for this design, I really wanted him to be very long and slim, with a lot of these pointy, angular shapes. And I wanted to keep him mostly sleek, but with these spikes of fur every now and then, because I think it really fits his personality. He's very brash and stubborn, but he's also very proud and oftentimes quite cool. And I wanted to show this with both his design and his body language, but I sort of toned his cockiness down a bit because I was drawing a slightly older version of him. Because I wanted to draw him with his scars, because I feel like people don't very often focus on him or draw him after his injury, because his character sort of unfortunately fell to the wayside, which I think is a huge shame, because when you isolate his story from like everything else happening in the books, it's actually really interesting because he goes from this very aggressive, xenophobic tiger star ally, and then he suffers a lot of hardship and it sort of shakes his confidence, particularly the stuff he faces directly from Tiger Star's actions like Swiftpaw. And then he eventually becomes this really respected warrior that even Firestar trusts. God, I've really got to make this longtail map. That's exactly what the map's about. Maybe I should make one of those map concept videos. So, when I was colouring him, I tried to do something I noticed that a few designs of him do, where they have sort of this base colour, either the yellow or the grey, and then slightly darker stripes with that base colour, and then the dark black stripes like accenting it. So I tried doing this with like a golden yellow colour, but I couldn't get it to work because it looked really cluttered, so I just removed it. And I almost got rid of this darker yellow colour entirely, but I really liked how it looked on his face, so I ended up keeping it there. And then so it didn't look weird only having that colour in one place, I also added it to his paws. And I'm very happy with how this one turned out, and I'm really glad to finally have a design down for him on paper / computer / whatever you want to call him. Because I've always had this very clear picture in my mind, but I've just never taken the time to draw it down. Now, next is the opposite of canon Needletail design. So in canon, Needletail is actually quite similar to Longtail. I imagine her being very sleek with this spiky fur. So for her opposite design, I went for this shorter, stubbier design with lots of fluff and soft edges, which is really far from sort of the edgy punk Needletail that the books give us. Particularly, I gave a really thick, like heart-shaped chest fur, a really short, fluffy tail, and then I made her hair, like her fringe, a sort of soft quiff instead of this spiky emo bang that if I was drawing canon Needletail I would have given her. Then I also drew her in this more reserved pose, rather than being very standoffish like she usually is. And then, of course, canon Needletail is grey, but grey doesn't really have an opposite in the same way that white is the opposite to black. I struggled with figuring out what colour I wanted to give her, but I just knew I wanted it to be in this sort of red, orange, brown range. So I tried a few things, but eventually decided to go with this dark gingery red, because grey is quite this cold colour, but red is sort of really warm, particularly this dark gingery red. And then for the eyes, even though in canon her eyes are green and red is the opposite of green, I didn't want to give her red eyes because she had red fur, and plus that would just look sort of weird. So I tried sort of oranges, orangey yellows, but it just didn't go well with the design. So I ended up going with purple, which even though it feels like it's quite unnatural for a start, this design isn't really natural anyway, so I thought it would fit, but it also just felt like a natural opposite to green when I couldn't use red. Something I noticed when doing these opposite designs, at least when thinking about some characters I was suggested, is that a lot of characters' opposite designs actually look like characters that are sort of important to their stories that often act as like a foil to them. So opposite Firestar sort of looks a lot like Bluestar, opposite Ashfur would look a lot like Squirrelfly, and even here, not exactly, but opposite Needletail looks a bit like Alderheart, especially if I had given her those yellow eyes, which is pretty neat. I like this design, I think it's pretty cute, but I'm not entirely sure how well it reads as an opposite of Needletail. I think I could have pushed it a bit more, and it's especially hard because grey doesn't have an opposite, but I tried. So next is realistic Heathertail, which I thought was a really, really pretty idea. When I got suggested this, I was like, I know I have to do this. I don't usually use a realistic style, and I wouldn't say what I did here was super realistic either, but it's significantly less cartoony than I would usually draw. So I tried to use more realistic proportions. I also added more details that I don't usually, so like whiskers and hair. And then I coloured the line art to make it look less cartoony, so it looks more soft and realistic, because obviously in real life animals don't have big black lines around them. And then finally I used a reference image for more natural posing, and it actually is a really similar pose to the canon art of Heathertail, which I didn't intend, but I think because I was thinking of realistic Heathertail, I had that art in the back of my mind without even realising it. So when I first coloured this one, I sort of didn't look up what Heathertail looked like and sort of tried to do it from memory, which sort of didn't turn out very well. I'm not quite sure why I went for this orange colour, but when I was colouring I used softer brushes and I made sure that they were sort of blended as opposed to having clear-cut markings. And I decided to go with this stripy pattern because most real cats, especially brown cats, have this tabby fur. And then at first I went with green eyes because I was worried that the blue eyes that she has in canon and the purple eyes that she has in fanon were sort of too unrealistic for the prompt. But a few days later, I actually came back to this design and just realised I hated it because it didn't look like Heathertail at all. So firstly, I recoloured her, got rid of the orange and used that ashy brown colour that she's sort of supposed to be. And then I was going to make the eyes green still, but I just scrapped it and went with a bluey purple, even though I know this isn't realistic, but you just couldn't tell it was Heathertail without them. And even when I looked at the canon art of her, the realistic canon art, she had the blue eyes, so Warriors doesn't care about realistic eye colour, so neither do I. Now, the next one was one of the most fun ones, which was Sparkle Cat Hawkfrost. And I love edgy designs, so I really went all out on this one. And I struggled a bit at first, but I really liked doing the posing on this one because I had this really clear picture in my head, and often when I have really clear pictures in my head, I struggle to actually translate them to paper. But this one, after a few tries, I think I wouldn't say nailed, but I think I got it pretty close to how I was imagining him. I wanted him to look really wild and energetic. And I also knew from the start I wanted to use these bright blue stripes. And so I decided to turn his brown fur to sort of this dark red, just to add that sort of eye-bleeding contrast sparkle aesthetic. And for the jewelry I gave him, because it's a Sparkle Cat design, you got to give him like a million piercings. So I gave him some earrings, just because they're fun to draw. And then I gave him 2 spiked collars, one around his tail and one around his foot. And I coloured them bright red just to add eye-bleeding, edgy contrast. But my favourite part of this design to do was the necklaces. So I really wanted to sort of represent the way he died through these necklaces. So I made one like bright red choker that looks like it's sort of dripping blood. And then also like a chain necklace that has the spike for the foxtrot sort of hanging off the end. And I'm a little sad because the pose I did sort of hid these, but I tried to sort of draw them in a way that they were almost flying off as he was jumping up so you could still see them. Finally, I also had a lot of fun doing his eyes, so I made them these bright blue, but then for his pupils I made them bright red and these sort of upside down crosses to sort of represent the dark forest element of him. And yeah, this design was just so fun. I just love doing edgy designs like this. I'm really happy that I got suggested Silverstream to do official design because I really love her ultimate guide artwork. The blues that they use are just so pretty. And then also her manga design is actually, well, manga, you know, they're not actually really mangas. But it's pretty iconic. She's got these sort of weird tufts around her eyes and then this big triangle on her forehead. And it's just one of the few manga designs that I sort of see and it's like, oh yeah, that's Silverstream. It's sort of interesting how the manga design is actually very purple, at least in the Feathertail manga. In the Grey Stripe one, it's sort of more grey. But the realistic artwork's very blue. So when colouring her, I sort of tried to get value in between this bluey purple. I leaned mostly on the manga design when doing the markings, but I incorporated the lighter belly fur and the white paws that the realistic art has. And then the realistic art also has these gorgeous markings around her eyes that I wanted to incorporate, but I just couldn't get it to look right. And I think it was sort of too detailed for my style and sort of looked out of place with the rest of the design. So, I mean, leave that stuff to the more realistic styles, I guess. And now finally, I got suggested to draw Flametail as a flame point Maine Coon, which is such a cute idea. And I couldn't find a reference for that specific flame point Maine Coon, but I found references for a flame point cat and a Maine Coon cat. So I decided to do the body type of a Maine Coon, but the flame point markings. I really think this one fits Flametail just so well, and honestly might be the way I view him canonically now, because we just have too many sort of brown or ginger tabbies, so it's nice to sort of mix it up. I know a lot of people draw Mothwing with a similar design to this, and while I really do like those designs and they're very pretty, I don't personally view Mothwing that way. I sort of prefer her designs when she's got this golden base coat with either sort of the face mask design or the tabby stripes. I never really pictured Mothwing as having this white base coat, but I really think it works for Flametail because it makes his sort of sibling group as well look more cohesive. So you've got sort of Dawnpelt with the cream coloured coat, Tigerheart who's a big fluffy buff cat, and then Flametail sort of a bit of both, which I think is really cool.